Hey, Allison Verhalen here, coming at you live for today's Marketing Monday. And today I actually want to give you a book review. I wish I had a physical book to show you, but I actually borrowed the audiobook from my library, which was awesome, by the way. If you're an audiobook person, you know that the narrator makes or breaks it. Anne Handley herself, the author. So the book review here is the book Everybody Writes, Your Guide to Creating Ridiculously Good Content. It's a really good book. I loved it. It is by Anne Handley. She does narrate she has an introduction because it's an updated version. She wrote the original version 10 years ago, give or take, and then updated it a year or two ago. So she does narrate that beginning introduction, the introduction to the updated version. And then I cannot remember the name of the other woman who narrates the rest of it, but she's really good. I think I've heard her narrate some other stuff because I recognized her voice. So awesome audiobook. If you love audiobooks, it was really easy for me to get from my library. If you're a library audiobook person, highly, highly recommend this. Not that it's not worth paying for if you want to pay for the book. I also highly recommend that. This book, I feel like I've been seeing I don't think I hadn't heard of it until sometime last year. And then all of a sudden it's like everywhere I look, everyone is telling me to read this book. It was on a list of SEO books that I was looking at, SEO books to read in 2023. I learned my lesson from that because there was another book by Adam Clark that was terrible and I do not recommend. And I was like, that's the last time I take advice on a book from the internet. But Handley's book, in addition to being on that same list, was also recommended to me by real life people that I know. So that was the final push to make me go, okay, I'm really going to read this book. And I'm very glad I did. It is very good. I don't consider it to be a book on SEO, despite the fact that SEO content is integral to search engine optimization. That is what Google looks at to determine what your content is all about, where to put you, which searches to match you with, how to rank you, all that good stuff. It is not the only part, but a very important part of SEO. And I'm sure Handley knows her stuff when it comes to SEO, just from what she did cover in the book. It's clear that she knows at least a little bit about SEO. That's not the focus of this book. This book is really focused on engaging and converting the real life people who find your website. I was at a networking event last week, and there was another marketer at the table, and we're going around and we're doing our introductions. And part of my elevator speech is that I help you engage the real life people who find your website. And this other marketer started laughing and then apologized because she was afraid that I would think that she was laughing at me. And I said, no, you're laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have dealt with too many marketers who write for SEO, who write for the Google bots, and have forgotten about the real live people that they're trying to actually engage and convert and get in front of in the first place. So the struggle is real. We've all been there. I would say my one complaint about this book is that Handley does not cover the fact that there is a balance there between attracting and engaging the real life people and also getting Google's attention. There is one section in particular. I mean, she talks about writing for your audience a lot throughout this book. It is a key theme in this book, which I love because it's a theme. And what I do and what I talk about is being very specific about who you're writing for. But she also talks about make it interesting, and she gives some examples of headlines. She has a whole chapter on headlines and has a really great thing about clickbait, for example, and how BuzzFeed ruined. She doesn't actually say ruined headlines, but definitely changed the world of headlines, especially when it comes to the internet, just because of how it got that clickbait thing going for us, right? And now everyone talks about clickbait headlines, right? But they use them for a reason. They're called clickbait for a reason. They get people to click. So she gives some really good examples of headlines that can get people to click. She does not talk about the fact that there's a balance between the fact that you need to, again, make sure things are engaging, but also make sure the keywords are in there. And that is kind of a tough balance. I've been there, done that, do it every day, right? It is tough. So that is something I wish she had talked about a little bit more, just because there are some very clickbaity headlines that look really interesting and I would love to use, but they have no SEO value. And it works the same way the other way around. There are some awesome SEO headlines that are just boring people to tears and no one is going to click on them. So strike that balance. So that is my one very slight criticism of this book, because again, this book is not really focusing on SEO. It's about how to write content for the real live humans who are finding your website. And in that sense, I think this book was just phenomenal. She also talks about just starting. Like my book, Content Marketing Made Easy, right? I called it that because it's all about making content marketing accessible for people who might go, I don't know what that is, and run away screaming, right? And I like to break it down and go, no, it's actually not that complicated. It's fine. Here's what you need to know. She's the same way about writing, making it a habit, writing every day if you can. It doesn't have to be hours and hours every day. It doesn't have to be all day. It can just be an hour. It can be half an hour if that's all you can manage, right? Just sit down and get some writing done and be really intentional about it and practice. There is this myth that either you're born a writer or you're not. I was born with a love of writing, but that love of writing led me to write a lot and read a lot and study what I read and study what I'm writing and think critically about my writing and just get better and better at it. So, yes, I was born with a love of it. I would like to think I was born with a certain amount of talent, but there's also been a lot of practice. Like any other skill, you got to sit down and you got to practice, or stand if you have a standing desk or whatever, right? Just make it a habit to write as often as you can. That is a big part of Handley's book. So she starts off with that. A next thing that she talks about is knowing what works for you. As far as your writing habits, so Hemingway famously loved to stop writing in the middle of a sentence so that he could pick it up more easily the next day. I've always hated that idea. I'm like, why would I stop when things are finally getting easy and I'm finally getting in the flow and I know what I'm going to say next? I always love to get to a good stopping point. Handley appears to be similar to Hemingway in that she says she likes to stop when she's in the middle of that flow because she finds it easier to pick it up the next time she sits down to start writing. Again, I find that really jarring. I hate it so much. And I still find that there's an adjustment period when I come back. I still have to kind of go, wait, what was I talking about? Now, what does work for me, and again, this works for me. You might find that you might want to go with Handley's strategy and or Hemingway strategy. Do whatever works for you. What I find works for me is when things are flowing, I jot down ideas. So for example, even in writing this blog post, I was writing down one section and then I'd be like, oh, that's right, I want to cover this other section as well. And I would just make a quick note of it and then come back to what I was writing initially. So it doesn't really interrupt my flow too much, but I make sure that I'm not going to forget that. That also ensures that if I'm interrupted in writing this blog post, I don't forget that section that I want to cover, and that does help me pick it up more easily. That is another thing that I have recommended to people who like using outlines, right? And if you don't have 2-3 hours in a row to sit down and write a blog post, maybe you sit down and do some research and then leave. Maybe you sit down and do the outline and then leave. And then because you have that outline, you can just start writing. You just start filling in the blanks. The bones of it are already there. That can make it that much easier. So I don't really like outlines, especially not for the fiction that I write, but for nonfiction, for these blog posts that I write, super helpful. Editing, Handley talks a lot about editing. She actually, again, does not like the writing process. She prefers the editing process, which I found surprising because I'm the exact opposite. I hate the editing process. Every time I have to edit something for a client, I'm like, oh, I love sitting down and writing. I love the info dump. But when I then leave it alone for 24 hours and I come back to it and I edit it and then I turn it in. And when I know I have to sit down and edit stuff before I turn it in, I just groan and roll my eyes inwardly because I just don't want to do it. And Handley's the exact opposite, which I found surprising. Now, there is a difference between editing and proofreading, right? And I do tend to do, my process is that I do a little bit of both. I read through it once to make sure that it makes sense, and that it flows well and it's got that good call to action. I do that to myself silently. And then I go back to the beginning and I read the whole thing again out loud, which Handley also recommends doing, because she says it can help you. It can alert you to when things sound kind of awkward or stilted and not conversational, which is true. That's another good reason to read out loud. I also find that editing out loud helps me slow down, because when you're just reading it silently to yourself, you can scan it real quick. You know what you meant to say. So sometimes you insert what you meant to say and you skip over those mistakes that you made without even realizing that you're doing it. So by speaking it out loud, that forces you to slow down in your reading and actually see what's there on the page or on the screen, as the case may be, and go, oh, that's a misspelling, or oh, that's a word that I missed. That is also a great way for me to catch those words that I repeated without realizing it. It's like, oh, I just used that word over there. And now that sounds kind of awkward. I should change one of those words to something else, right? So edit some more. Handley also points out that there's, editing for your brand voice, editing for audience appeal, making sure it's good for your audience, as well as the grammatical errors and the flow and all of that good stuff. So it's not just one or two run throughs that you got to edit. You really have to look closely at each and everything every time you edit. She also mentions the value of having a good editor, because no matter how good you are at writing or editing, nothing beats the value of another pair of eyes, especially a professional pair of eyes on your content. So absolutely, I back her up on that 100%. Right, for your audience, talked about that a little bit. And I want to just reiterate that, right? Know your audience, use the language that they use, make it interesting for them, focus on their pain points, make them the hero of the story, where they get to save the day by buying your products or services, right? So this is a theme that comes up throughout Handley's book. It comes up again and again. It comes up again and again in what I do, in the content that I write, in the videos that I do here. I'm always saying, know your audience and create content for them. Handley says the same thing. So we are totally on the same page there. And again, make it interesting for them. I did talk a little bit about, the fact that there's making it interesting and then there's making it SEO friendly. So those are two different things. Same goes for length. Handley mentioned there's a debate in the world of online marketing over the length of landing pages. And this is, again, where there's kind of a debate over, again, a balance, I would say, between writing for SEO and writing for the real people who are looking at your website. So Handley says Handley doesn't cover that in this section. And I wish she had, because it is very important. There are people who are looking specifically for products and services. They are either ready to buy right now, or they're getting ready to buy. They're thinking about buying, right? But they're doing a little more research. They want to know, is someone doing this in their area? Is someone doing this who specializes in a certain area or working with certain people or certain groups? You want to make sure all that stuff is on your landing page. You want to make sure it's long enough for Google to find your website. So I'm not saying your landing pages have to be super long, but they do have to be long enough to get Google's attention. So, for blog posts, we talk about the value of 1,000, 1,500 words for blog posts. Yes, absolutely. Landing pages, not so much. Most of them, I would say at least 500 words. And if they're 500 words, they're good. But there are people who say like 800 words, 700 to 800 words for SEO value for a landing page. Again, if you have that much to say, great. But again, back to the real life people, Handley has a point that people don't necessarily want to read a ton of content. They want to know if you can help them, how you can help them, how you can make their lives better if they decide to buy from you. Focus on that. So again, it's all about creating that balance. And if you are, I will always say this, is don't try to reach a certain word count just for the sake of reaching a word count. If you've written 500, 600 words and you've said everything there is to say, great, leave it at that. Don't Don't try to fill in extra words that aren't really saying anything just for the sake of getting to an arbitrary word count, because that's not going to be helpful to your audience. So again, that's another area where I wish Handley had talked about. And when you are creating longer content, make it scannable. Shorter paragraphs, shorter sentences make it easier for people to scan, especially in this world of scrolling that we are living in right now. And headlines. Headlines also make it really help break up the content, make it easier to read, easier to digest. They also make it easier for people to identify the section that really interests them, that they really want to focus on, and they focus on that. So keep that in mind. Branding your content, know your brand voice. She gives great tips for identifying your brand voice, and then using it. And she also talked about the difference between brand voice versus tone, which I love that she included this, because I see those used not only interchangeably, but I see people talking about brand tone of voice, which is not really a thing. There's your brand voice, and then there's your tone. The way Handley puts it is that your voice does not change, your tone does. She had a great example that I won't plagiarize. The example I would use, because we can all relate to this, is like if you're sending someone a card, right? The tone of a birthday card is going to be very different than the tone of a condolence card, right? You're not going to have the same tone, but you're still going to have the same voice. It's still you writing it to the same person that you still have the same relationship with. So your tone will change, your voice will not. Same with branding your content. Your voice should never change. Your tone should, depending on the type of content you're covering, depending on how people are finding this content, where they are in the buyer cycle, where they are in their lives when they find this piece of content. So absolutely keep that in mind. Gated content was an interesting section. So if you're not familiar with the concept of gated content, the idea is that you got to hand over your email address before you can access a certain piece of content on a website. It's really frustrating for people who are just trying to figure out who you are and what you're all about. And all of a sudden they have to give you their email address before they can continue finding out who you are and what you're all about. It's frustrating. And Handley recognizes that, yeah, there are benefits to having this. There are marketers who swear by gated content as a great way to build your email list and lead people through the buyer journey. Sometimes it feels more like forcing people through the buyer journey, right? So yeah, and Handley had a great story that she used that kind of exemplifies how that can be super annoying. And she said that on her website, marketing profs, they decided largely against using gated content, which I found interesting because I stopped following marketing profs years ago because I could not access any of their content without handing over my email address. And I did find that very annoying and disruptive. So I left, and I have not been back to them. So I wonder if they changed that since the last time I visited their website, and maybe I need to give them another try. Follow your own rules. This is where we get into like 3 different sections about writing tools, humans versus machines, right? There was a different story actually where she talked about someone who, and I cannot remember his name, but he founded a content marketing company, sold it for a lot of money after just a few years, really knows his stuff when it comes to content marketing, but created an a sales email actually that was just really bad. And that made me feel better, because there are times where I will look at my own content, especially after that 24 hours, where I come back and look at it and go, really? I didn't incorporate all these things I always tell my people they need to be incorporating. And I feel silly for not taking my own advice. And here Handley points out that there are times where even other professionals don't follow their own advice. The other thing I loved about Handley, the way she did this, is she gives you the bad version and she tells you why it's bad. She breaks it down for you. And then she gives you the good version and explains why it's so much better, why it's so much more effective, as well as the different results that this person got from the first version versus the second version. So this is a really great way of just helping you understand what's effective writing, especially when it comes to marketing, and what's not effective and why. It's not just here's what's good, here's what's bad. She really breaks it down for you so you can go through and go, okay, that's why this didn't work, and that's why this did. Really helps you with your understanding of all that. So loved that about this book. She did also give a whole section on writing tools. Some of the tools she incorporated, she called this is the one thing I don't know if I agree with the narrator on this, but I will give them a whole bunch of credit for trying, because it is a stupid, stupid name. It's not stupid. I understand where the name comes from. It's ahrefs, refs.com. And no one knows how to pronounce it. It is not meant to be spoken out loud. It is meant to be looked at and read and entered into a URL. And I get it. That does not change the fact that it's frustrating to say out loud. I think I always pronounce it refs in my head. The narrator pronounced it hrefs, but that doesn't account for the A that's at the beginning. So anywho, that's an SEO tool that a lot of people swear by. Moz, what else? Answer the Public, which I use all the time, but had not realized that there is like a headline suggestion component to Answer the Public. So I will have to look at that. What else did she mention? CoSchedule's Headline Analyzer, which I use all the time, but I do take it with a grain of salt. I've talked about that before on my channel and in my blog. But it's always a good starting point. Some of the writing tools, she talks about like the Hemingway editor, for example, which again, I've used. But again, I take that with a grain of salt, because we have all these recommendations to avoid passive voice and write super short sentences and avoid adverbs, right? Sometimes an adverb needs to be there. I don't know if I would ever say it needs to be there, but it can really change the meaning of what you're saying, of the meaning of the content. There are some sentences where, yeah, the adverb is not necessary, get rid of it. But every once in a while you come across a case where it's like, oh yeah, no, that really needs to be there. Again, avoid passive phrasing. Like, come on, every single sentence being active is just going to be exhausting. No one actually wants to read all that. But when you're putting content into, even Microsoft will flag you for some of this. And I love that Anne Handley talked about fighting with Microsoft when it would yell at her for using a fragment. And it's like, she's like, yeah, but my people know what I mean. And this is my voice, right? The Hemingway editor, and the Hemingway editor, same thing. I use it to kind of help make sure that my content is readable and easy to scan and easy to understand. I get it, but there are times where I take it with a grain of salt. She also pointed out that she took one of Hemingway's own books and put it into the Hemingway editor, and it flagged it for long sentences and too many adverbs and all kinds of things that supposedly Hemingway never did, right? But to anyone who's actually read his writing, it's like, yeah, no, he really did. So know your own voice. The machines, the AI can be super helpful as a tool, as a starting point, maybe to alert you to some stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to know your own voice. So I always like to say that you can break the rules, but know why you're breaking the rules and have a really good reason for breaking the rules. Be able to back it up with a really good reason. Don't just be like, well, I feel like it, or I just think that word would be better there because or that phrasing is better because it just sounds better. That's not good enough. Have a really good reason for it. And if you don't have a really good reason for it, then go back to what the AI told you to do. And like me, Handley is not super worried about AI taking over our jobs. She does think she recognizes it's been around for a while. It's not as new as people say it is or talk about it like it is, right? ChatGPT is not the first instance of AI being in our lives. It's just not. That said, this book was written and published. Even the latest edition of this book was published prior to the release of ChatGPT. So it might be time for another look at that. So another version. So that is it. That is everything that I have for you today. That is all of my thoughts on this book. Excellent book. Again, it is called Everybody Writes, your go-to guide for creating ridiculously good content by Anne Handley. Highly recommend it. And if you have any questions, again, my book, Content Marketing Made Easy, is available on Amazon. Also, that is one that balances writing tips with some of the SEO. So that's what sets that apart. Obviously, I'm going to recommend that you check that out if you're at all interested. And if you have any questions, you can find me at my website, avwritingservices.com. And you can reach me directly at info@avwritingservices.com. That's it. Have a great week and happy blogging, everyone.